So the last few months have been full of planning, preparations, making lists, hitting deadlines, just all the things that are a little bit stressful. And I know I still have deadlines in front of me, especially for the Beetlejuice house, which is what I'm going to be working on today. I have a timeline, and what I should be doing right now is working on the lights and the punch list for the first floor. But after the miniature show and a lot of other things that are going on at the moment, I asked myself, what do you want to make? And pretty much always my selfish answer is going to be furniture. I love making furniture. And it's been a long time since I've just sat down and made something I wanted to in the moment. This is going to be a very classic Bentley House Minis video where I am making some furniture from scratch, from my own design, no laser cutters, nothing like that. I'm just going to be sitting down, drawing something out, and building it. And I'm only going to be focusing on one miniature in this video, easy breezy, just to get myself back into the rhythm of making things. Thankfully, I still am making progress on the Beetlejuice house. I am going to be making a piece of furniture for Delia and Charles' room. I'm going to be doing this eventually anyway, so I might as well do it right now when I'm needing a little bit of a break from all the technical stuff. So without further ado, let's get started with the inspiration photos from the movie and what I'm going to be making. Today I'm going to be focusing on these curvy dressers, which you can see being brought into the house in the move-in scene. Later, we get to see that they ended up in Charles and Delia's room because they are behind Adam and Barbara when they are dressed like ghosts. And as you can see, there is a TV in between them. The TV is important because Delia actually wakes up, thinks the noise that's coming from the ghosts is coming from the TV, and turns the TV off. I've also included a more zoomed out reference of Delia and Charles' room because in the future I do need to make their bed and I wanted to know what it looked like as I was planning things out. Thankfully, it's a very sparse bed. It should be pretty quick to create. But today I'm going to be focusing on the dressers. The first step, which is going to be incredibly important, especially in this house, is figuring out how much I can fit in the room. Everything is cramped into very small spaces, so I'm going to use Gomez and Morticia's bed from my Addams Family project because I did make this one a little smaller than it should be to fit into their bedroom. So now I can use it as a reference because I do think it holds up looking like a bed that could hold two people, but it is a bit smaller. I laid down a 6-inch ruler in the space across from the bed. There is a line where a future closet is going to go, so I'm very limited on space. I have about 5 inches to include 2 dressers and a large 80s TV. If I was going to try and fit both dressers and the TV into 5 inches of space, either the TV was going to have to be very small, non-existent, or the dressers were going to have to be really skinny. There's just not enough space for everything. So I've decided to create a version of these dressers where it's turned into a vanity. It's going to have one of the dresser towers, and then the rest of it is going to be a flat surface for the TV to sit. This is the best compromise I can come up with to deal with the space limitations, but still give the feeling of the room. And even though the curvy dressers have always caught my eye, I don't know if they're as iconic as something like Delia's sculptures. So I don't know if too many people are going to be thrown off by the fact that I've changed up the layout. So I have one side that is the tall tower, just like you see in the movie, and the other side is going to have kind of a trunk base where I can add the TV on top. And then I'll add a few shelves above the TV so I can add in some details. Delia is somewhat of a minimalist, so I don't want to add too much, but if I do want to add details into their room, there's not much space to do it, so I want to make sure and give myself a few shelves when possible. I created my drawing within a 5-inch by 5-inch square, And then I used a curved drafting tool to get the curvature of the original dressers. I added it back into the space to see what I thought, and originally it was looking a little bit short, but once I added Adam back into the room, I felt like this would be a good size for a dresser / vanity. And I do think it will fit near the closet, but the closet door is going to have to be pretty skinny. So now that I'm happy with my general idea, I'm going to add it onto some mat board and start to trace my shapes. You will see pretty quickly that this is not perfectly drafted. It's not going to have perfect 90-degree angles, but for this type of furniture, I think this process works well, where I'm just kind of using the shapes that look good to my eye and going with the flow. I first traced the overall shape of the back of the piece of furniture, and then I traced the face that's going to be on the front of the tall piece, and then I traced the face of the shorter piece where the TV is going to fit. So this large piece is the back, this is the tall piece, and this is the short piece next to it, and that's how I'm going to refer to them as I'm building this dresser. So now I'm going to cut everything out of mat board. And as I do that, I'm marking the face of each piece with an up arrow so I know which direction everything goes. I decided to double the thickness for the tall front panel and the short front panel. I think as I'm building the dresser, this is going to make them stronger so that if I have to kind of pull to get some of the pieces in line with the curves, they're able to hold their own, and it just makes a stronger piece of furniture. So I have a double thick layer of mat board here, and so now you can start to see my vision of how these panels are going to go together. I originally thought the tall dresser tower would stick out further from the smaller, shorter piece, but when I got my little sample TV from my store and tried it in place, I realized the TV was going to need a lot more room. So I think the shorter side of the dresser is going to stick out further. With the amount of drawers that are on these dresser pieces, I refuse to make them functional. So I'm just going to be gluing my drawers onto the front of the dresser. To get the shape of the drawer fronts, I traced the tall sides front panel, and then I made a 1/16 inch gap on either side. And these are going to be my drawer fronts so that you can see a little bit of the dresser face surface behind the drawers. So it will make sense in a second if all of that sounded like gibberish. I don't think I ended up with as many drawers as there are in the original reference, but I do end up with 10 drawers because I divided up my 5 inches into 1/2 inch drawer spaces. And I still think that will be enough. If I get too many in there, how is she going to fit anything into these very shallow drawers? Although, come to think of it, Delia's always preferred form over function, so you never know. Now that I've separated and numbered each drawer so I know where they go in the sequence, I'm going to sand all 4 sides to give them a little bit of a rounded look. This is also going to help define the gaps in between each drawer once I glue them onto the front of the tall dresser piece. As I glue them on, I'm lining them up in between my pencil lines to make sure everything stays in place. And I forgot to mention, I also did the same thing for the shorter part of the dresser. They're just going to be longer dresser drawers. The process to create these was exactly the same as the tall part of the dresser. So now I have all of my drawers, and this is how they are looking on the front panels of my dresser. And now it's time to create some dimension because these pieces are still very flat. Now, this is going to be the tricky part because this is a curved piece of furniture and my mat board is very straight. I cut 2 pieces of mat board that were about 1 1/4 inches wide, and then I laid it next to my dresser. Anywhere there is a curve, I'm marking straight across this piece with my pencil. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's just letting me know where I need to score my mat board in order for it to curve. And the bottom part, I put an O over it because I need to score on the opposite side of the mat board. If you're unfamiliar with the term scoring or to score mat board, I'm just cutting through the very top layer of mat board and leaving the rest of it connected. This allows it to curve when I start to pull it in a certain direction. So now I'm going to transfer my pencil markings onto the opposite side of the mat board because I will have to score it on the opposite side for it to curve in the opposite direction. So once I have all of the scoring done, I can carefully curve it in the directions that match the side of my dresser. And I want to hold it up to the side of my dresser to make sure that everything looks correct. And then if it doesn't, I can add in some more scoring if I need it to curve a little bit more. I was happy with this piece, so now all I need to do is translate the exact same thing onto the other side, which is going to enclose the other side of my dresser. Now all I need to do is carefully line it up with the back of the face of the dresser and glue it along the edge. I'm trying my very best to line it up and get a smooth connection, but if it's not perfect, I do have a trick I'm going to do later on that will smooth out the sides. I'm going to do this for each side of the tall part of my dresser, and as you can see, I left a long piece at the bottom. This is because I couldn't get it completely to hold in place while I was trying to see how long it needed to be, so I decided to leave it and cut it off once my pieces were in place. And to do this, I had to build up a little cutting surface so that I could cut it correctly once it was glued on, because it would no longer lay flat on my work surface. So now I have a finished enclosed side of my dresser. Well, not completely enclosed. The top and the bottom are open, but that is okay. You will see why in a second that is important. I traced the pattern of the tall piece onto the back of my dresser, and this is going to let me know where the left side of my dresser should hit the back so that it doesn't encroach on the space for the smaller portion of the dresser, which I will glue next. Here you can see why access through the top and bottom of the dresser was helpful. I was able to move the pieces by putting my finger inside and pushing it towards the edge, making sure it lines up as best as possible. And here's my little trick for making a smooth side. Now I could sand and fill and then sand again and go back and forth trying to get this edge smoothed out, but instead of doing all of that, I am going to cover it with a layer of cardstock. This is going to make everything look smooth on one side. I'm using wood glue and then just smoothing it out with an excess piece of mat board. And then I'm just pushing it into place, making sure it makes contact with all of the glue I laid down. I do not want any space that doesn't have glue on the other side, because when I go to paint it, it may bubble. And I guess we'll figure out if I did that right when we get to the painting portion. I did the same process on the other side of the dresser. I think it's going to be easier to do this before the shorter side of the dresser is put in place. This was a bit easier because I did have an edge to go against, but I will have to be careful cutting the cardstock once everything is dry because it is close to my drawer front. When cutting off the extra cardstock, I used my craft blade to go as close to the dresser as possible, but I was very careful not to cut into it. So if there were any little extra bits left over, I carefully removed them after I got most of the cardstock off. At that point, it was very easy to sand the rest of the edge and get a smooth connection between the cardstock and the back of the dresser. I'm going to follow the same steps for the other piece of cardstock. However, I'm just being very careful and going slow because this is the front of the dresser. This is one of the hard parts about making Delia's furniture. Everything needs to be very sleek, and I'm not traditionally super good at sleek, so I'm trying to figure that all out. I'm going to follow the same steps for the short side of the dresser. I made a piece of mat board that sticks out a little further than the tall piece and then scored it and glued it to the back of the short piece dresser front. To start, I'm only adding glue to the side that's going to touch the tall piece of the dresser that's already installed, and I'm going to make sure I'm very happy with that connection before I glue the other side. I end up using a clip to hold these together to make sure it doesn't separate while things are drying. Now I can add glue to the remaining side of the short piece and make sure that it's really lining up with the edge of the dresser and that everything will look good. So here's how it's looking once this is put together. I hope you can kind of see my vision coming to life now in 3D. At this point, I added it back into the space because, before it was just a 2D sketch. And I do think I'm liking how it's coming along. And of course, I'm remembering that I do want to put some feet on this. So it will be pushed up maybe just another ½ inch from where it's sitting now. Thankfully, the inside edge between the short piece and the tall piece was smooth enough that I didn't feel I needed to cover it with cardstock, but I did want to cover the outside edge of the dresser with cardstock, so I just did that the same way that I did on the tall part of the dresser. So now I can work on the countertop where the TV is going to sit. So I first just put a blank piece of mat board onto the space, and then I traced in where I needed to cut it so that it would go around the back edge of the dresser. Once that was in place, I could trace around the short piece so I knew where I needed to create my overlap for the counter edge. So I'm just using a straight edge to go around that. Obviously, it's not complete 90-degree angles, but that is okay. We are custom fitting it to this piece, and for this one, I'm not creating a pattern. I'm just going with the flow. And whether I use my 3D printed TV or I make a custom one, I think this is going to be plenty of space for a 1980s television to sit on this dresser. I doubled up the countertop piece so that it's now double thick and let that dry. And at this point, I realized I could no longer tell the difference between my mat board scraps and my cardstock scraps, so I took a break to reorganize everything before continuing on with this dresser build. Let me know in the comments if you're one who cleans up during a build, or do you just wait until the end after everything's just everywhere? I was happy with how my countertop fit, so I decided to sand the edges that are going to be facing outward, and then I glued them onto the short side of the dresser. Now I am going to be sanding most of the edges of the next pieces that are coming up, but I'm only going to be showing it on this piece, and really sanding the edges is up to you. I just think it gives it a nice finished look, especially when you're using double mat board. It kind of blends the two pieces together. I'm using a wide piece of mat board to trace the footprint of the dresser, and this is going to help me create the base of the dresser. I used my ruler to go around and make about a 1/16 inch edge that went all the way around, and this is how it's going to sit. Once I was happy with the size and look of that piece, I doubled it up, sanded it, and glued it onto the bottom. And this is where I really feel like this piece started to come together and look like a finished piece of furniture that you would see like in a movie set or something like that. So I was really happy with this point. I'm going to do basically the same thing with the top of the tall side of the dresser. So I'm going to flip it over, add it onto a piece of cardstock, and trace around the edges. This is when you can really start to see that I don't have 90-degree angles going on here, because it is angled out on the edges, but once it's applied to my overall dresser, you can't really tell overall. And then especially once I paint it and add some details, you really won't be able to tell. So I'm just moving forward and not trying to fix anything or, re-glue anything. I wanted the top edge of the back of the dresser to also look finished, so I added this extra piece of trim, and this is just going to butt up against the piece that's on the tall part of the dresser. I glued it on top of the back, and this is what I have so far. In my original sketch, I drew a couple shelves, but I think I'm just going to add one large shelf that's going to go above the TV. I want to keep the look simple and sleek. I do plan to put items on this shelf, so I added one more small piece under the shelf to add as an extra support, and I did cut the edges to kind of curve with the curve of the tall piece, so hopefully it all looks like it works together. I want to keep the feet of this piece fairly simple, so I found these beads that are around the same color that I want my final piece to be. And this is good because they're plastic, and plastic is sometimes hard to paint, so if I just leave these the color that they are, I'm hoping they will still work with my final design. I sanded one side, the side that was going to be glued to the mat board, and then glued them down with some wood glue. I used 5 total feet because of the extra bump out that comes from the short side of the dresser, and I'm actually really happy with the look. It feels very 80s to me. So I'm moving forward with it. Now, before I start the painting process, I do want to pre-drill the holes for the handles. Instead of measuring the center of each drawer, I decided to use my pattern. I just measured the center of the top and bottom and then put my pattern in between those two and drew a line down the center of the drawers. I did the same thing for the short side, and then I did measure the center of the drawers in the opposite direction, so I knew I got them exactly where they needed to go. And then it was time to drill. I did make one tiny mistake in this process, which you can see here. We accidentally have one extra hole. This is what happens when you're thinking about lunch while you're supposed to be paying attention to what you're drilling. Oops. Thankfully, I usually have a little baggie of lightweight spackling sitting near my desk somewhere. I just continually use it. It always comes in handy. I just pinch off the end of the bag whenever I am done using it and then just set it to the side. This is going to fill the extra hole. I'm going to let it dry and paint over it, and hopefully no one will ever know. At this point, most of the construction was complete, so I erased my pencil lines, and here you can see from my drawing concept to completion, here is my piece of furniture for Delia's room. I think it still has the vibe of that curvy dresser, but it's going to work so much better for my limited space. I'm very happy with the results, and I can't wait to paint it. It's the next day, and I don't think I've ever been more excited to paint a piece of furniture and see it come to life. I'm actually a little nervous about it. I really want to get it right. I've really enjoyed building this piece and just kind of letting my imagination flow and not having to think about, is it fitting together perfectly? It's not. There's some gaps here and there, but overall, I'm so happy with it. So let's get into the painting part. But first, I did want to say, I know I'm not creating a pattern for this, but I am going to just upload my little drawing here because you saw me use it on how I built this. So if you wanted to download this and build your own, it's not going to be one of my perfect patterns where everything's put into the computer and measured out. It's just, it is what it is, but you're welcome to try it out and make your own. So let's get to the painting. As I said, my construction of this project was not 100% perfect, so I did take a little bit of time to fill in any gaps. There's this gap on the back that no one is ever going to see, but there was also one that I filled off camera that was right underneath the tall piece, so I wanted to make sure and fill that before painting. I know this piece of furniture is not supposed to be orange, so you may be wondering why I am painting it orange at this moment. I wanted to play around with putting some undertones and also just using a base coat that might, I don't know, maybe brighten up some of my upper layers. So once I had done a base coat of orange, I was custom mixing a color that I thought was close to the original color, which it is supposed to be this like yellowy blonde dresser, and I think I had some furniture in this exact look when I was a kid, so I should be able to match it or see it with my own eyes and figure out the correct color. As you can see here, you can see some of the brightness of the orange coming through. I didn't like it enough to keep it this way, but I do think it's a cool technique. What I'm doing is just using incredibly thin layers of paint. So I'm laying down paint and then just pushing it across the surface until it's as thin as possible. I did a second layer. You can still see bits of the orange showing through, but I don't know, I kind of like it. I went ahead and painted the beads that I used for the base. I was thinking about leaving them unpainted, but I did paint them and then protected everything with a matte spray coat. I felt like the paint had filled in some of the gaps in between my drawers, so I took a sharp tool and just redefined those gaps to make sure these look like they were individual drawers and not all connected together. Here you can see the difference between the tall side and the shorter side. I think it looks so much better after I've dragged the sharp tool over the gap. So I'm going to do this for the other side as well, and then the painting process is complete. The last step for this dresser is the handles to open the drawers, and these are going to be incredibly simple, just little sewing pins. They are very small and petite in the original example, so this was just the easiest way to do it. Because I had pre-drilled the holes, they were very easy to just add a very small dab of glue and then push the pin through. Because the drawer is not opening, the pin can just exist inside of the dresser and it's not going to hurt anybody. I would say this is the end of the video, but I did design this dresser for a very specific purpose. We definitely need a television. So I used this TV earlier as a guide to figure out the size. This is a misprint. As you can see, it's missing a couple feet. So whenever I misprint something, I can't sell it in my store, but I do hold on to them for occasions such as this. So I'm going to try and reuse this television. It's just not the right look. It's not the right style for Beetlejuice. So it's more of an late 1970s, early 80s style, I think, and I need more of a late 80s style TV. So what I'm going to try and do is reuse the screen and some of the buttons, and then build a more angular outer casing for the TV to match the look I'm going for. First, I'm going to cut off the knobs. You're going to see them a little bit, but hopefully they'll look more like buttons by the time I'm done. And then I measured around the opening of the pieces I still want to see, and I'm going to transfer that opening onto the mat board and cut it out with my craft knife. Then I can put it back onto my TV, make sure I can still see all the parts that I want to, and then I'm going to tape the mat board to the front of the TV. This way I can securely flip it over and trace around the outside of the existing 3D printed television. I don't want my new TV to be much bigger than this one, so I'm just going to be building on top of the case that already exists. So this is a very thin frame once I've cut it down, but it does look good. I think this is going to work. You'll have to let me know how you like it in the end of this video. I'm going to follow the same exact steps for the back of the television because I still want to see that pop out vent thing. So I'm going to trace around that, and then once I have my front and my back panels, all that's left is to start building the sides, which should be straightforward. This process of building up the sides of the TV went pretty quickly, and then by the end I had a very angular television that also kind of reminds me of a microwave a little bit. So now I know how to make a microwave if I need one. The original 3D print had a grid on the front of it to look like a speaker, but I'm going to cover that up with a flat piece of mat board to make it look more like a flat keyboard or number panel where someone can type in the number of the channel they want to watch. And then instead of the cute little feet that were on my original TV, I'm just going to put a flat slab of mat board to lift it a little bit off the surface of the dresser. To help my makeshift TV case look a little bit more like it was professionally made in a factory, I decided to sand every single corner, and then I'm using Mod Podge to blend everything together. This is also going to make a very nice connection between the mat board pieces and the original 3D printed pieces, so there are no gaps. The TV in the movie reference is definitely black, so I started painting it with a black gloss, and I decided later on that I do not like the glossy effect. I will show you what I do to change that, but I also paint the screen with a gray because I do want the TV to look like it is off. I had a wonderful suggestion of putting Poltergeist on there, which I thought was really fun, but I'm gonna go with the off screen. Because I didn't like the glossy look, I sprayed it with a matte finish, and I like this a lot better. I think it looks a little less like a plastic toy. And even though I couldn't see any silver details in the movie reference, I did decide to go ahead and add some of my own to really give it that 80s look, the 80s expensive look with the silver details, you know. I'm using a ball stylus because it's a little bit easier to control on some of these raised surfaces. I wanted to add a keypad onto that silver surface. Instead of cutting out individual little keys, I just decided to cut into the surface of the silver rectangle, and I think this worked really well. I know there's a lot of 80s, 90s type electronics where it was just a flat silver surface with just very thin scores in between the keys. So I like how this came out. This next step I kind of regret, but I left it anyway. I decided to dry brush the edges of the television with silver to just kind of bring out some of the details. I over dry brushed in a few areas, but it was going to be a lot of work to repaint it black and then respray it, so I just decided to go with it. Now I'm going to add some diamond glaze to the TV screen. Diamond glaze is like air dry UV resin, so it's not resin, but it can like make surfaces like resin, and it just air dries. Mine is hopelessly clogged, so I just dropped a few drops onto the surface of the TV and then used my ball stylus to get it all the way to the edges of the television screen. And then I could just let that sit and dry. So here's the difference between my 1970s, early 80s TV design and my upgraded one, or my updated one. Anyway, it's still retro. They're both retro, but I really enjoyed how they both came out. But now it's time to put it all together. Let's add the television to the stand. I do have a couple things I have been saving for Delia's room. This is a clock by Mario Messina, and I will put all the artist information in the description box below. But I thought this clock would be perfect for Delia's room. And a long time ago, I purchased this hat by Kathy.vowles, and I just thought it looked so Delia. Now I may redo the stand. I'm not quite sure Delia would work with the stand, but I thought the hat was perfect for Beetlejuice. So you'll have to let me know if you think these items work for this dresser, or if you think I should switch things around. I also know I need to make a remote for Delia. I will have limited space in Charles and Delia's room, so really this piece of furniture has the most surface for me to put any type of details on. And before we go, of course, I will show it to you in Delia's room. Here's the look through the window. As you can see, I have plenty of ceiling space, so it's not going to look too crowded if I have items on top. And I need to show you how it looks through the actual viewpoint, because people aren't going to be looking through the ceiling. I'm so happy that I put the tall side on the right side of the dresser, because it's very clearly seen through the opening. So that's all I have for you for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed it. And if you're craving more Beetlejuice content, do not worry, because Beetlegust is coming up. And if you've never heard of that before, it is Beetlejuice related projects all August long. And if you're wondering what it's going to be, I'm going to be working on the final Netherworld section, and it is going to be Saturn, where all the sandworms go in and out of the sand. I am very excited to work on it. I hardly ever do this, but if you'll take a moment to make sure you are subscribed. I know some people have been saying they haven't been getting notifications. They have been unsubscribed to the channel for some reason. If you would take a quick moment and check that, I would really appreciate it. I appreciate every single one of you for being here and continuing to watch Bentley House Minis. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. I like these glasses, but they just continually, slowly fall down until I'm a very judgmental librarian. Stay up. You want to try them? You gotta be still. Ready? Ready? You're not interested? Okay. She's not interested. She's got 20/20 vision. You're perfect. Okay. She's perfect. No arguing about that.